Hey guys, it's Marv from Pods Like Us. I'm here speaking with Ace, the other half of the creative crew behind Stellar Future Radio. And anybody that listens will know his voice as soon as he talks, because Ace is also the voice of the main character in the show, Roy. Hey Ace, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing very well. How you doing today?
Not too bad at all. So you
Yeah.
are introducing me to another show that I'm going to have to listen to, because as soon as you started mentioning it, what it's about, I thought
Mm-hmm.
it's so um it's so of the time, the actual subject matter in the show, because it's all about, well, explain what the show is to people and what it is that the show's about and why you love it.
The show is called Sayer, and
Yeah.
it's I forgot how old it was. They released it in 2014, so it certainly was a good half a decade before its time. But it is a draw. It's a dark sci-fi comedy where the main character is an artificial intelligence whose task it is to introduce the listener to this retirement community. It's never made completely clear, but sort of this home for human beings being transported off Earth onto this asteroid named Typhon, which struck the Earth and created this event where people need to go live elsewhere. And um, like I said, it's a dark comedy. It really explores that sort of that point of view of what an artificial intelligence would think of human beings, looking at them from their perspective, and it explores that, but in a darkly funny way.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, very what's it of the time now, and like
Yeah.
you said, it's before its time as well. But the time that came out, it's really strange, because you've got other shows. If you go back to then, other shows that were before the time, because I'm thinking of things like, I don't know if you know it, like Ars Paradoxica and shows like that,
Mm-hmm.
and even the beginning of the Bright Sessions, Lauren, Shippen's program, that
Okay.
they started. I mean, luckily for Lauren, with the Bright Sessions, that started, and the whole thing of audio drama became a big thing in podcasting, almost because of shows like that where people were getting more into that. But things like you're talking with Sayer and with Ars
Yeah.
Paradoxica, that also go back to that sort of period, is that
Mm-hmm.
it was basically people were listening to podcasts for the chat podcast or the film podcast, and all these, back then, what they were, talk radio essentially, but online.
Yeah.
So people weren't ready then for these shows. So it's almost like times had to catch up. And I'm guessing you're like me, where, I mean, I've been listening to podcasts since the late noughties when they first started, but I
Right.
didn't listen to those. So I'm going back to these shows and thinking, oh God, how did I miss this? How did I miss that? And
Mm-hmm.
we're coming at it later because time has now caught up with these shows.
Yeah. It's without a doubt the bulk of podcasting, like you said, is talk radio,
Yeah.
but on podcasts, so it's on tap whenever you want it for as long as you want it. And I think that that fills a void for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Not only are they learning about or hearing topics that they're interested about, sports, film, but I think it also fills another void as more and more of us are staying home and are becoming less social. The talk radio component, or the branch of podcasts that are talk radio, fill that void of feeling like you're hanging out with friends, or
Yeah.
definitely these characters that host these shows. You get to know their character, and then you get to feel like you know them. And then within podcasting, there was this other niche, which was even a further throwback to,
Yeah.
like, when Champ approached me about producing a podcast. the first thing that I thought of was remembering a friend of mine's dad back when I was like 12, 13, and how he got a cassette tape set of The Shadow from like the
Yeah.
50s.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that that was super cool. A radio show, and obviously that didn't even exist in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up anywhere. And then when podcasts hit the scene, here we are again, where we've circled back and people are able to do narrative dramas
Yeah.
using podcast as a medium. And not only that, but with the technology being what it is these days, instead of having to create Foley sound effects as they did back in the 40s and 50s, we have, database upon database. And so the challenge becomes then, how do you come up with a narrative that's compelling enough to hold the listener's attention while not over explaining? And
Yep.
and one of my favorite things about Sayer, and something that we certainly borrowed from them when we created Stellar Future Radio, is there's a super mystique to it where nothing ever really gets fully explained.
Yep.
And I think that's a genius move on their part, because a trap that you can fall into when you build a universe in the science fiction or even in the fantasy realm is over explaining your universe and having that extra exposition of a character going on and on about why something operates a certain way. And Sayer, without a doubt, I mean, if anything, if you read the reviews of Sayer, some of the reviewers are sort of critical of that, of just saying, when does this lore come together? Like, when do we start piecing the whole story together? Because they are dedicated to keeping it aloof. And when we were creating our own product, that was it was like a sand trap when we were writing it, because I was like, I don't want to, I want to go the way of Sayer and be more mysterious and not explain everything. The challenge in our show, of course, is that we're basing, we have so many moons and different governments and stuff going on, that the canvas is much larger, and you're going to lose listeners unless you do take a time out to say, like, okay, this type of government is operating here, or this company produces this sort of product, and this is how much it costs to do this, that, or whatever, because they're not going to get your humor. They're not going to get your jokes if they can't put two and two together. But with Sayer, they limited it to this very mysterious, and you don't even know necessarily the motive of the main character, of the AI. Is it programmed to keep the listener in the dark? Is it keeping it in the dark because it doesn't respect the listener? Or is it keeping it in the dark because it itself doesn't know all the answers? And again, that never gets fully explained. Now, to be honest, it went for 6 seasons, I believe. And then the pandemic, something went haywire, and like that last season, or the last 2 seasons that the fans were hoping for, didn't happen. I'm only 3 seasons in myself.
Yep.
And so I might be speaking ahead of myself. Some of these things may be made clear in the seasons I haven't listened to yet. But again, that extra mystique of not revealing too much, both in cinema and in television, and even in books that I've read, I prefer more of that open-endedness of, like, well, why are things this way? I don't like the hand-holding that a lot of storytelling, leans on, and that might be a mistake, because it might make something more marketable if you do explain everything. But I think it's more bold to go the other way.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of going into a different realm, but with filmmakers and things like that. A lot of those older generation filmmakers and creatives would agree with you that there's too much. Every question has to be answered before you get to the end, and there's also the fact that it's almost like they're knocking you over the head with a hammer to make sure that you know what it's all about as well. So they'll constantly repeat things throughout a film or throughout a television show or throughout something to make sure that you know what they're on about. And it's not allowing the person who's enjoying the experience to actually use their own imagination where, I mean, I used to find that when you're talking about these old audio shows, when I listened to the old Orson Welles War of the Worlds back in the day that I've listened to that a few times. I've got it on CD, for crying out loud.
Well, it's worth it. It's worth it.
You lose yourself in that because of that sound. And when you do this right, and you have the right sound there, you have the right effects, and you have the right everything there, you don't need the pictures to tell you that to do it, because you allow your own imagination and your mind to actually do something for itself, and you create that world in your head around all that. And that's what your show does. And we were still doing it on the BBC in the UK with things like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in the 80s. You know, which is a really good radio series as well.
Yes, absolutely. And an influence on us as well. Yeah.
If you do it right,
I can't agree with you more.
Then that works.
I appreciate you saying that. It means a lot. I think you're absolutely correct. It's if you leave a breadcrumb trail for your listeners, and then they piece the gaps together for themselves, you're getting them to invest into your show, right? And in doing so, they feel more a part of it. When they're piecing together the landscape and not having it explained to them, then it brings them one step closer to feeling like they're in it. And with Sayer, certainly the patience that they have with the delivery, and the patience that they have with not over explaining, you can tell, or at least I can tell, that the writers of the episodes choose to hold themselves back, and you're being narrated to like you've just woken up from this brain programming or this hypersleep, and you're only you're only ever referred to as listener, citizen, and by piecing those gaps together, like I said, you feel more and more like, okay, this AI is speaking to me, and I'm picturing what little details it gives me about what things look like or feel like, or what happened, what was the event that brought me here. I am at the mercy of this program, and that's unsettling. But at the same time, it's the only source of information that you have. Hence, you are just as a character in this scenario that they've dreamed up. You are at the mercy of this machine to tell you what's happening, and whether or not you choose to trust it is entirely up to you. And again, like you were saying, I think with cinema back when it was back when there were more projects that were done with a lower budget, that challenge of doing more with less led to a lot of wise decisions of, don't over explain it. And now we're in this age, particularly with film. And then, I mean, television isn't, streaming television isn't far behind, where the budgets are getting larger and larger and larger. The people that are greenlighting them are willing to risk less and less. And what you end up with is, instead of rolling the dice with your viewing audience, you want them to understand everything that's happening, because however many millions and however many, multi-million, hundreds of millions of dollars have gotten put into this production, you don't want anyone to turn it off because they don't understand what's happening. And so it's sort of a snake eats its tail sort of scenario. You throw enough money behind a project, you're willing to take less risks. And for the people who are doing the lower budget projects, they also have to compete with the glam of the higher budget things and so you wind up with fewer and fewer studios, fewer and fewer filmmakers that are doing more with less. And you wind up with, and then not to mention the fact that the people that are trying to make money off of this, they need to sell to foreign markets. So they need to make sure that the translation, that the dub in Mandarin or, in German or wherever they want to sell, they need to make their money back in foreign markets as well. Hence, you've got these scripts that, like you were saying, just explain time and time again what's happening. So that when, the dimensional rift gets ripped open in the sky and all these monsters from wherever, it it gets a little mundane. Not that there aren't films like Guillermo Del Toro, for example. He does a lot of stuff like that with large budgets, but he maintains that mystique where not everything gets explained. But fewer and fewer filmmakers and television producers get that opportunity, I think, because of the budgets that gets thrown at them.
Well, I mean, there were. I didn't think we'd be going into Del Toro, but I'm going there.
Let's do it.
But with Del Toro, you've got something like, he will do the big film like he did the Hellboy films. I still think that his Hellboy films make that more modern version with David Harbour. You know, nothing bad about David Harbour. I can't say anything bad about him because I love him as an actor. In Stranger Things and other things that I've seen him in, but nobody comes close to the vision that Del Toro put in there. But I will still say that I think Pan's Labyrinth is an astounding film when you compare it to something like Hellboy. You look at Hellboy, and it's a good film, but Pan's Labyrinth and these sort of things that they're really close to him as a creative. They have a different feel, and a passion project to him have a different feel to them entirely, and they are just something really special.
I agree. I mean, he's one of those filmmakers, and he's not the only one who does this. I mean, many do, but those auteurs that have a box office draw and will do the studio picture.
Yep.
And even when they do the studio picture, it's not paint by numbers. You can tell that, his signature is all over something like Hellboy and the sequel, the Golden Army sequel. Then he gets that box office and whatever, he gets a war chest, and then he's able to put that money behind something like Pan's Labyrinth or oh God, what was the other one? The orphanage in Spain. It's leaving me right now, but those and I agree. Pan's Labyrinth is a masterpiece, not only in his catalog, but just cinematically in general. Yeah. And particularly I'd have to say for the American audience, we in the States, in that particular era of history, it's World War II, and even then, it's never like the Russian front. It's always Normandy. It's the Allies, which very rarely do they even include the Russians in that. It's usually the Allies. It's like, it's us and the English versus the Nazis, right? Yep. The whole story of the Spanish Civil War and all the politics and everything that went down in Spain at the same exact time, that doesn't even really get taught in our schools, or at least it didn't when I was in school, but it might now. And to weave a Pan's Labyrinth story, about that girl who wants to escape her reality, and she goes into this fantasy, and the fantasy is just as dangerous as the real world. Yep. And is it fantasy? Is it not? Or what? These things don't get answered, and that's fine. That's what gives it its timelessness, rivaled only by such thing like the Never-Ending Story or whatever. You can almost see his influences on it. And in the meantime, when we have these portions of the story which are told in the real world, the quote unquote real world, that whole Spanish Civil War component going on, and the fascists versus the socialists and anarchists during that whole time, and not even that whole political landscape gets explained for an audience that, now obviously if you're Spanish, if you're European, what's going on, but for Americans, why not? We've got computers in our pockets now. There's no excuse. Like, what the hell was going on in Spain? Why didn't no one tell me this when I was in school? And all you have to do is Google it. And now you're invested in that film. Like, the film has taught you a thing that you didn't know before, while showing you all these fantastic supernatural practical effects and computer effects. And I mean, it's obviously, it would take hours to unpack just his presence in the industry. It's a shame of it though, because I distinctly remember, and I can't decide if this is just me being nostalgic or if things have really changed that much, but I feel like there were more creatives like him 30 years ago, 40 years ago, where a practical effects driven film would marshal a budget, and at the same time they wouldn't try to macro the script so that it could be marketable in all sorts of different countries, and you wind up with a lot of timeless pieces which now are getting remade for less because the technology has gotten cheaper, and
Yep.
they're trying to cash in on this we don't need original storytelling sort of thing.
You've just made me think about, so when I think about the filmmaking, we're still down this tangent here.
I'm with you. I'm right there.
Still on this, when we're on this Del Toro thing, and you're on about there, I look at a lot of his work and I can see the inspiration that he's got from people like, it's almost like the storytelling of a Leone married with the creativity of Henson and Harryhausen. You see what I mean?
That's beautifully put. Yeah, no, I absolutely. And you know what? I've never seen the Leone component until you've just mentioned it. But now it's like you mentioned it, and I'm like, yeah, of course. Yeah. He's got that. There's that Western
darkness to it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the good guys are good and the bad guys are bad, and
Yep.
the darkness of Guillermo del Toro is that the good guys don't always win, or even
Yep.
like in the story of Hellboy, which is one of his studio pictures. It's like, how good are the good guys really, though?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, okay, the quote unquote, but our hero is being manipulated by a government force. Toro, Guillermo del Toro obviously has got a problem with authority, which, harmonizes with me. And so that ambiguity of, I'd even throw in too, I would imagine, like, it's really refreshing that you would say Leone, because I'm going to be unpacking that in my head for a couple of days. Because for me, I always saw the Kurosawa connection with him.
Yeah.
And so for every time I would like dive into one of Toro's movies, I'd be like, I wonder how much seasoning of like Ron or Seven Samurai is going to be in this one, and
you've got a hell of a lot you've got a hell of a lot of Rashomon in Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that, and again, the beauty of it, and I think being a creative at the top of his game, when you have the opportunities he has, or whether or not you're producing a podcast, actually, to circle back to podcasts, it's not just, what am I trying to say? One of the most exciting things about producing a podcast for me that I didn't see coming down the pike when we decided to do it was paying the homage to all of the influences.
Yeah.
And making the nods to the things that came before that inspired us to do the thing. We've made nods to Sayer and the different podcasts that said, well, they did it, maybe we could do it too. But the influences that pop up that you don't even realize are popping up until you go over the script or you listen to the recorded product and you realize, oh, I'm borrowing from so and so, and in this quest to try and come up with something original, you have to just let that mantle down and realize you are the sum of all the things that have ever influenced you, and inherently whatever you write and then record, or if you're doing a film shoot, you're going to, until you do it, you won't even know some of the influences that are there.
Yeah.
And so we're talking Guillermo del Toro, and now suddenly I'm thinking spaghetti westerns, and I'm seeing how a lot of that story structure fits into some of my favorite Guillermo del Toro pieces. And it hasn't been until I spoke to you that I realized that you wind up being a product of, like I said, you're product of your influences. I mean, when I was in film school and I desperately wanted to, be an auteur director, and I would tell everybody that my favorite living director was Danny Boyle. I was like, oh, I'm borrowing so much from Danny Boyle. I want so desperately to be like him, but when I shot a couple of shorts, or when I was like the DP on other projects, and working with the writer director on that project or whatever, when I saw the footage that I would shoot or the scenes that I would direct, the irony of it was, as desperate as I was to emulate Danny Boyle, a lot of decisions that I made shooting from the hip while on set, trying to solve a problem, and then looking at the footage, and I'm like, oh my God, Michael Mann actually wound up being a much bigger influence on me and when I was in film school and you have these conversations and you're young and all that matters is your ideas and all that, you sort of fill your dance card with who you're going to say inspired you to do what. And Danny Boyle was always at the top of my list. And it wasn't until I actually produced a few things, had to make decisions that weren't planned, had to cut scenes together that it wasn't an assignment. It was an actual project. There was an actual deadline and all that. And then you wind up looking at it and you're like, I'm visually trying to be like Michael Mann now, Anyway, I'm wandering away, but one of the gifts of making your own product, and something that I would say to anybody out there who's considering making a podcast or writing a book, writing a script, anything, is that there's going to be the references that you make or the homages that you pay directly. And then there's going to be those influences there that you don't even realize are there until you're done with the product and you'll watch it and you'll realize, and for a lot of people, I think they cringe and they think, oh, they're ripping off somebody or not or whatever. And that's really not the case. There's a difference between just copying somebody's story versus paying an homage versus the influence that's inherent in your DNA. Like, this is what I grew up watching. This is what I want to do. When Champ came to me and said, what do you think about making a podcast? The first thing I told him was, I remember directly, I'm like, I don't want to just be a guy who sits around and talks about my opinion on the microphone. Yeah. As much fun as that is. I'm like, I don't want to, wax philosophic about things I don't know about, because we'll do one season of stuff that I do know about. And then I'm just going to have to double down on that personality. Like, I know things that I don't, and start talking about things that I have to research the night before or whatever. Yeah. And I want to do a narrative. And when we were constructing it, suddenly I was back at my friend's house as a 12-year-old hanging out. We're playing Legos or whatnot or whatever. And I see on the mantelpiece, there's all these cassette tapes with this really cool logo that said The Shadow. And I didn't even know what the hell it was. And this was before the internet. So I had to ask his dad, and his dad just, Blue, Pennsylvania Blue Coal paid for this radio show, and he played a little bit for me. And I'd never even considered like storytelling just in the audio format, and to realize that was a lucrative industry in the 40s and 50s, before everybody had a television in their house. And now we've cycled all the way back where if you want to tell a story and you think that you can do it with just audio, there's nothing stopping you, because the technology is cheap. There's plenty of people out there that are willing to work hard, and all it takes is a lot of organization and that acceptance of it's going to be exponentially more complicated than you imagine it when you started it. When I listen to Sayer now, after having produced some of my own material, I'm like, wow, they really, like I said, they have a lot of patience, because they're not trying to beat you over the head with information, and they're not trying to throw too much. I mean, again, it's I can tell, or unless that's just their personality, but I can just tell it's like they must have in their head or on paper a universe that's 10 times bigger than what they're giving us, at least, if not 100 times bigger than what they're giving us, and they're patient enough to dole it out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So, you've already explained how it influenced yourself, but where you were going there before we finish off, what you were saying basically is, it's like a band where you get all these influences from all these different other bands that you're into,
right?
But then you take all those and you make them into something else. Essentially, they are built from all those little specks of inspiration that you've had from here, there, and everywhere. But then when it comes out from you, that is then melded together in your own special way, and then comes out as your own thing, really, without, like you said, if you do it properly, people will not always notice the inspiration until you mention it, and then or someone mentions it, or you mention it, and then they'll be like,
just like
"Oh
with
yeah, I didn't see
Leone
that until now."
and
Yeah,
Del Toro just now, like you said. Yeah. Not only that, but with Sayer, I'll add this last bit in terms of not only an influence or an inspiration, but even when we had made all the decisions about what we were going to do, we were going to do the news, and what was the jurisdiction or the landscape going to look like, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and after we'd come, after he and I had come up with the history so that we understood the motivations of not only the allocator, the news allocator, but the citizens that he's allocating to. Next came the task of trying to come up with a voice. And I can't tell you how awkward it was. At least 2.5, maybe 3 months where I recorded the pilot and played it back and just hated what I heard, because it was like, there was an awkwardness to it because I was getting used to it, but B, this desperate search to try and come up with an original voice for the main character. And the irony of this was that I was listening to a number of podcasts at the time in order to have a grasp on the genre that we were doing and the people that were successful in that genre. And while I was listening to these podcasts, I'm like, yeah, but it's so original. It's so original. And what we're recording right now, it sounds like I'm trying to be like Walt Disney or something. Like there's this over friendliness that I'm trying to do. And I can't, it doesn't sound original. It does, this desperate need to sound original. And then I don't even remember how I got hit in the head, where suddenly I realized, and I can't speak for the creators of these other podcasts, but the two lights that went off in my head was listening to Welcome to Nightvale and realizing that the narrator in Nightvale, to me at least, and like I said, I can't speak for the creators, but to me, it reminded me of Rod Serling in The Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
And the deep voice, the calm, steady, ice in the veins delivery. And I'm like, they're doing their version of Rod Serling. Yep. And then I thought about Sayer, and I realized that they were, at least in and I'm prefacing this again. Yep. I can't speak for the creators, but to me, it was like, this is HAL 9000. They're doing a HAL 9000 thing where it's this machine that's obviously talking to you. It's clear that it's a program, but it's trying to be human at the same time. And that unlocked in my own head, it's like, okay, you don't have to be desperate to be original, even in the voice that you choose to use. And I did a little bit of research at that point, and I realized, when in doubt, while I was recording these episodes that we had written, it wasn't the worst thing in the world to lean on what I find is like one of the primary influences on Stellar Future Radio, which is Max Headroom. Yep. And having done enough research where it was like, since the era of Max Headroom, the only times that you've ever seen him have been just cameos in different movies, where they want to add a bit of seasoning of the 80s into it. I hadn't seen Headroom redone again, where he's this AI program who's enjoying his time. There's a sarcastic level to him, almost like a meanness to him. Yep. And we didn't want to emulate that, but at the same time, it just it took this weight off my shoulders while we were doing the initial recordings, where I was like, when in doubt, just lean into your influence, because these other people that have made things that you very much admire and have inspired you to do your own thing, they did it too. And that's okay, because we don't want something like HAL 9000 to disappear. We don't want Rod Serling to disappear. No. There's a nostalgia element there, and it was so cool back when it was being done for the first time that it influenced people, and now it's coming back in a different incarnation, and that's cool. That's different than a remake. That's not the same as a reboot. It's an influence. It's a pure, honest influence, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. When you said HAL 9000, I thought, wow, of course, that was something that was in my head when I've listened before. But I also thought, like you said, with the Max Headroom, it's essentially sort of like almost like an AI character. Roy is an AI character that's trying to be almost trying to be more humanistic towards the people that it's talking to. In essence, it's sort of Al 9000 before Dave pisses him off, really.
Yeah, exactly. And it's fun too when writing it, because it's set so far in the future that in my own head, I don't need to just divorce what happened in my fictitious history versus just having this. I'm like, okay, so what, while I'm writing Roy, why not HAL 9000? Why not that be an AI that existed at one time? That event that happened at one time. Why not just go ahead and have that? Just pretend that that's a thing that actually happened. And when you're constructing an artificial intelligence, which is fun to write for, because you're talking about an entity that never gets tired, that never has to sleep, that doesn't have a bad day, isn't dealing with, it's performing its function, and it wants to, it's programmed to relate to humans. It's programmed to be likable for humans. And so even if when we were doing the first season, and now as we are gearing up to do season 2, it's this idea that I don't have to worry about Roy seeming desperate to be liked, because that's part of his programming. He's designed to marshal the trust of the people and not betray it. And hence, whereas in this universe that we've created, there's plenty of AIs that are sick of humans or don't even understand them, and they're out doing their thing, and that's fine. Roy and the others that are like him are, a big part of their whole function is to try and understand humans. And in Sayer too, like a page that we borrowed from them, are these moments that you hear throughout the series where Sayer itself is sort of, ruminating on how different human beings are. And even because it's a dark comedy, there's even like I sense a hint of judgment there. Whereas with Roy, he would not judge humans for being afraid of death or needing to eat all the time or needing to sleep. It's like, oh, this is something humans have always done this. If anything, Roy as a character is there to remind humans that, like, whatever you're going through, like, this is nothing new. Like, this is, ironically enough, even though now we're flying between moons and we're using spaceships and we're all this advanced, human problems seem to just recycle themselves. It's always the same thing. You're always chasing a dream, not attaining it, or you're attaining it only to find that it's not what you wanted or whatever. And with immediate access to all of recorded human history, I felt like when we were creating the character, and I still, when I write the character to this day, is that there is this this catchphrase always going off in his head where it's like, oh, this is nothing new. Like, this is what you humans always do. And instead of getting judgmental about it, or like, why don't you people evolve beyond it? They can just see, like, oh, this is how it's always been. This is just humans. This is what they do. It's fine. And it's been fun to write from that perspective, especially now with everything that's going on. And when we started writing the project, there wasn't any sort of AI programs made public, and now there are. And we're only looking on the horizon. Literally, when we started the project, I was like, maybe when I'm in my 60s or 70s, this will be going on. And just a few short years later, we're like, oh God, all right, we have to hurry up and like get more done, because who knows if the next incarnation of AIs are going to make what we already wrote seem dated. But here we are.
AIs are making their own shows.
I know. No, it's absurd. I mean, it's exciting, but also absurd. It's funny to think. I remember seeing a tweet where somebody said, here we are working at jobs that we don't like, and we've created thinking machines that make art and music, which is what we were supposed to be doing. We were supposed to make machines to do the work that nobody wanted to do. And now we have machines that are doing the things that we always dreamed of spending our time doing. And I'm like, yeah, leave it to humans. I mean, it's like, here we are. Like, of course, like, did we really think it would go any other way? Which again, is something to laugh about and to bring that positivity in. I remember Champ was adamant that we make a positive sounding podcast, and I agreed with him. He's better at it than I am, But when a notion like that comes up and I'm like, oh, we could write this into the show and be mean about it, like if or sarcastic at the very least about it, a la Max Headroom. I always have to challenge myself and be like, okay, what's the next step? Like how would we put a positive spin on this? How do we make people laugh about the irony of this instead of cringe? And that's an ongoing theme with every one of the scripts that we write.
Well, we'll get into that more when we have our chat as the three of us together, when we have the eventual
Absolutely.
chat.
Absolutely, yeah. But
right, so let people know where to find the show then, Ace, and how to get hold of you.
I'm really proud of the website, so you can always start there, stellarfutureradio.com. But we are distributed on Spotify, Audible, Good Pods. We're just trying to get the name out there. So eventually, if you write Stellar one day, the AI that's running the suggestions will just fill in Stellar Future Radio. But yeah, wherever you do your iPods, we made sure to be there. And all you got to do is type in SFR or Stellar Future Radio, and we ought to pop up.
Well, I already do that with, on Apple Podcasts. If I'm searching in it and I can't find it, because you're still on a break, so they don't come naturally on my feed, and I will put it in the search on Apple Podcast. I'll just put Stellar, STELLAR, for anybody interested. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as I put the space, it'll be there at the top of the list of the ones to choose from. And I go, yeah, I'll have that one.
Fantastic. That's, you know what? That's the best bit of news I've had all day.
There you are. You're there.
That was the idea.
Yeah. Yep.
But check out Sayer, because like I said, before there was us, there was them. And it's like I said, it's a lesson in having a whole universe in your head and choosing the 10% that you share with the listener and keeping that intrigue going. It's a masterclass in that.
I'm going to going away from Sayer because I haven't seen it yet, but I will just say to people, if you want a good hour and a half of decent sci-fi related audio drama, I would suggest that you mix this with Desert Skies is a good show to throw in there, and possibly a Megastar 7 as well. That's incredible as well. If you have all those three and following the other, that's a really nice hour and a half for you to just sit there and let yourselves just go with it. Yeah.
Desert Skies I'm familiar with, but Omega Star 7, I remember you mentioned that on your broadcast with Champ 2. I need to look that up. In fact, I'm going to look that up when I'm stuck in traffic today.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Ace. I'll let you get off now. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Marv. Have a great night. I'll be in touch.
Take care, everyone. Bye.